Hi, I'm Bruce Hembree of Ciena, and I'm here with Alan Meeks, the CEO of MOX Networks. So, Alan, tell us a little bit about MOX.
Yeah. So MOX was founded 13 years ago by Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong. Initially, it was to provide capacity for his healthcare mission of curing disease with big data. And we've evolved, since then into a real carrier.
A real carrier. And as a matter of fact, right now, we're at Honolulu, Hawaii at PTC, where a lot of the carriers get together to talk about the next generation needs and that of the network. So I understand you've been to PTC a few times.
Yeah, I think I've been coming since around 2009. Yeah, so definitely that.
Over 15 years.
Yep. And it's changed quite a bit in the years that I've been coming, especially now. I mean, it's amazing with the subsea landscape growing so much that, this year is just so focused on subsea, and what a better place to do it than Hawaii.
Of course, it is where it all comes together, the crossroads, as it were. So when you think of subsea, you think of MOX, you think of the changing landscape. In some of our conversation before, you talked about the dual mandate of MOX. So remind us what that means.
Yeah. I mean, again, thinking of MOX as the parent company Networks being like a healthcare cloud company, a healthcare AI company that had to found its own carrier to be able to supply its needs. Going out into the market wasn't going to be able to give Patrick the type of capacity that he needed between certain locations. Our demand is different than a typical cloud provider in that, cloud providers' demand can come from kind of everywhere and anywhere all at once. We really know where our demand is coming from as we're doing patient trials in specific locations and doing our compute in different locations. But what is very similar and not different is the scale that we're dealing with. We're dealing with very similar scale challenges.
Okay, so from the scale side, you deal with the unpredictability that the whole AI networking infrastructure business is facing now, but you've got a bit more predictability with respect to the locations where you provide connectivity between.
Yeah, and that's evolved, through drug development and, the methodologies that Patrick's doing to cure disease. If we do a certain number of patient trials in one location, we're going to compute in one location, and we're sharing data in another location. These are national labs, these are universities, these are data centers, interconnection points, and hospitals that we're dealing with, right? So we know what the design needs to look like, but we don't know quite how much to invest for the scale. And that's the similar challenge that we're seeing, that we run into, that a lot of other AI companies are running into now, is how do you future-proof against the scale when you're not quite sure how much is it's not just where, we know where, but we don't know how much is coming.
But you're talking about things like genomic research and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
So, when those universities are preparing for that scale, what do they think about that's in common with the rest of the AI universe that we're working with now? So what can we learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it's we sequence a full genome and a full protein pathway as well. They call the proteome. We do that with healthy tissue and cancerous tissue for each patient. And that happens usually 3 or 4 times in a patient treatment life cycle. So, we're talking each sequence somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 terabytes of data. And then you double that, and then you times it by 4 over a life cycle. And that's not data we just have to store, right? We have to elastically be able to compute on that data. And so really understanding, again, the scale, where it's coming from and how we're going to deal with it, and preparing for that without, I like to call it future proofing, right? Because you could look at a system, you might have enough capacity to give you a runway that gets you to a certain percentage of, your demand at the time. But in our world, if something gets, like an FDA approval on a methodology, we could go from a 10,000 patient trial to serving 100,000 patients overnight. And that could be multiple parallel systems between locations as opposed to just one system.
Oh, well, that's really crazy. So a lot of the network providers, the service providers, as it were, out here at PTC, they've made a living building networks. But you've got experience on both sides, both with the compute aspect of things, like you're just describing, as well as the networking piece of it. So how does that expertise translate over into both how you build and operate the networks for non-medical applications out there?
I mean, it's a great question. We've had, the traditional carrier methodology is really just driven around, success-based opportunities. Yeah. And that's really what's moved the industry forward for years. And it still is today. The uniqueness about us is that dual mandate, and that we have our own capacity needs internally. And that if we need to overbuild to try to future-proof against that scale, but maybe that future scale doesn't come on the route that we build it, well, now we've got access capacity to sell to the market. And I think our reputation of being able to do these things, do fiber builds, from scratch, permit, design, permit, engineer, construct, laying ducks in the ground on gas pipeline right-of-ways, rail right-of-ways, pulling fiber through that, developing ILA sites, all the way to, developing with you guys high capacity C+L networks as we go to light those. All of that, from a traditional carrier standpoint, really was more based around the success base. But with that dual mandate, we kind of have a different economic model where
you can be more intentional.
That's right. Yep.
And that seems to be making a huge difference from the conversation we've had with whether it's the hyperscalers, the neoscalers, large enterprise, in whatever category. I mean, healthcare, gas, oil, pipelines, et cetera. It seems like y'all are really in the sweet spot, providing that unique expertise of knowing how to operate a network, but also the applications that are right on it to pull that together as an operator.
That's right. Yep. And I think a lot of the carrier experience they've not had that experience, right? The carrier experience, again, has been success-based. It's here's how much capacity I need. We respond to the request, which is fine. And that's really what, again, pushes the industry forward in many ways. But yeah, our experience of being able to build and understand those scale challenges personally has really affected the way that we think about and build networks and how we not just approach it from an engineering perspective, but also just from a financial perspective.
Yeah, 100%. That makes tons of sense. And one of the foundations of this iteration, some folks have said that PTC is going through 4 different life cycles, I've heard, but this is much about that AI connectivity, and also the subsea aspect of it. So one thing that's super cool, I believe, with what you're doing at MOX is you've got your terrestrial business that you've been doing for some time, but also really heading deep into those subsea applications, right?
Yep. We hit a similar scale challenge on a handful of routes, Trans-Pacific, and even to Latin America, where leasing capacity wasn't going to make sense in the long term. So we started looking at options, what was out there, what cables were being built, could they be monetized? How would they be monetized? Could we be a player? And as we explored that, we found that we really kind of fit, you could call it a niche, but to your point earlier, it's maybe a little bit bigger than a niche. Super niche, yeah. That we're one of the, if not the only, one of the only North American focused carriers that's actually doing international subsea connectivity. But again, we parlayed our legacy demand into new investment into IRUing full pairs on multiple cables. And it's happened very quickly for us, and it's satisfied our demand, helped us achieve that future-proofing of scale, and really been a great business case for MOX at the same time.
Right. And if you look at the customers that you've already signed up, the ones that you're talking with already, it seems to be exactly what they're asking for.
They seem refreshed to deal with us, is that we're not a traditional carrier, that we do understand these challenges.
A bit more nimble.
Yep, that's the other side of it, the flexibility and the understanding of their challenges and how to build these networks, as opposed to the rigidity of some of the legacy, ILEC operators, let's say, that don't really see the world this way or have not productized things like spectrum and dark fiber and high capacity wavelengths the same way we have.
Some of the in conversation, in customer conversations that we've have been part of, it sounds like, yes, you productize your solutions, but you don't even have the rigidity of having to have a productized solution, that you can really customize a true solution based upon the needs of that customer at any point in time.
That's right. And for them, just like it is for us, it's also an economic consideration for them, and how are they investing in these networks? And a traditional carrier really wants to put a lot of the equipment, the network build costs onto the customer to recoup that. And it makes sense. That's their economic model. But these guys are building such large networks, they've outgrown the carrier. Just like we outgrew the carrier 10 years ago and did this ourselves, all these guys have outgrown carriers as well and are becoming their own providers to some extent. So when you watch how they're doing networks, we will look at how we're doing networks, we find those similarities, and then we communicate to them, that's how we do it, because we see that that's how you guys are doing it. And this is really what it requires to get to that scale.
That's great expertise. And when we think about expertise, a lot of the folks here, have scientific backgrounds. They love the equations around stuff, Shannon's limit, whatever. But it seems like y'all have really, put your expertise together to understand better the equation around the balance of the compute. How you need to design GPU usage, the pricing for that, together with the capacity network, and then really putting that all together to help your customers really design the optimal network for what they're looking to get accomplished.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
That is fair. Yeah. And I think a lot of, what we've experienced in growing our own network, again, it raises the same types of challenges that other AI firms are dealing with. And when we can, not just talk about that we know how to do it, but actually show a proven record over time. completing fiber builds, lighting systems, tying into subsea and commercializing capacity that frankly any other carrier was able to do in those situations. Yeah, our capacity planning internally, I imagine, is probably similar in some ways to a lot of the AI firms. And that's it's not just network. I mean, network is a huge piece of it, but we're constantly looking at how much compute we're going to need, storage, where that's going to have to be. The network plays a really important role in that. But as much as Patrick is involved in technology as it relates to healthcare, right, and the science of healthcare and how to do personalized evidence-based medicine, we're researching how to own our own fabs, to generate our own electricity behind the meter with energy utility districts that we control. All of these things, so it's not just the network, it's all the way up the stack into what it takes to deliver that. And yeah, the network is a vulnerability. There's a lot of challenges with capital and labor and equipment, right, and getting things on time. But the compute side is almost more concerning in a lot of ways, right? Is that not just compute, but also equipment. How are we going to make all the semiconductors we need? That's something we think about a lot, and it drives our methodology and how we're going to build networks.
Yeah, 100%. I believe it's really that ability to put together the science and put together the expertise, and then operationalize, that all together that, sets MOX and Ciena as a partnership apart. And we're excited about the future together. When we think about the future, it is January. We're here in beautiful Hawaii. If you had to think of one prediction for 2026, what do you think of?
I hesitate to predict because it's always a dangerous business. But if I'm going to try to look at, tangible items that are driving the growth or lack thereof in certain segments. I think for me, that really comes down to looking at, again, availability of actual equipment, right? But all the way down to that semiconductor level, like where is this stuff going to come from? Who's going to make it? How are we going to make it? How are we going to get to market? All of those things come into play in our thought process. So if I'm thinking about the future, I'm thinking about, okay, cost of capital going up, cost of labor going up, the shortage of labor, right? These are all very concerning things. But at the same time, you see what human ingenuity has been able to do under all these stressful circumstances, and we're still able to grow this industry at the pace that we're growing it at. I think we'll figure it out.
I think we will. That certainly gives me confidence in the future. And again, thank you to Alan. Thanks to all the folks on the team at Ciena and at MOX, and we look forward to that future together.
Thanks.